So Michael's been down in Woburn with the new restaurant.
All right. It's now 7 o'clock and I'll open the meeting. A meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee was held today, Tuesday, September 20th at 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr., Chairman.
Present.
Alderman at Large Michael B. O'Brien, Senior Vice Chair.
Present.
Alderman June Karen.
Here.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Derek Tebow is here. We also have in the chamber Alderman Klee, Alderman Dowd. On Zoom we have Alderman Camo. And in the crowd we have Director Tim Cummings and Director Matt Sullivan.
And Director Sullivan, no, Cummings. Who's sitting next to you? Another
It's
sitting
Amy.
employee? Amy is here.
Amy DeRoche.
Amy
DeRoche
DeRoche is also here. Sorry, Amy.
All right. So I'll open it up to public comment.
Lori Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. A couple of items. You're going to talk about the riverfront, or no, the TIF project. I had an opportunity to attend that meeting on August 31st with the advisory board. And John Vancour from Hayner Swanson came in and gave a presentation. I thought he was excellent. The guy was very knowledge-based. He was a very quick speaker, so it was hard to capture everything. But he brought up some interesting points, I thought. They called in the DES immediately when they began their project because they wanted to make certain that they were doing it correct because they were dealing with a body of water. And the DES ended up having concerns about the Renaissance Park, that Parc de la Renaissance, as well as the screening that was going in at the Eversource facility. And I think that's an interesting thing to note because we know we didn't involve the DES in some of our other projects to look at things before we got going, and it ended up being a problem. The other thing he mentioned is that the contracting company hired to provide overall contract management services has backed out of the deal and they can't do it. And I didn't get the initials. It was VHB or BHB. He spoke so fast I couldn't understand it. So they're going to stay on and continue to do the permitting process and the structural design elements because those two tasks were too hard to complete and change with a new individual. I want to address the minutes that were done for that meeting really were not done. Nobody took minutes in the meeting when it was happening. There was no recorder of any sort happening. It wasn't tape recorded and it wasn't being written down. I happened to type this in my computer because I just was sitting there and I wanted to try and understand what was going on. But I think that's a compliance issue when we don't do that. When the meeting minutes were finally released, I really do have issue with them because it didn't note that we didn't have, that the contract manager was backing out or that the DES had come in and had concerns and what they specifically were. I attended the special meeting of Public Works on August 13th or 16th, where a presentation on this riverfront project was given and so what they've decided to do is remove the park from the project. John Vancour requested it be removed so it wouldn't hold back on the permitting process. But that really wasn't conveyed to Public Works. And I think those are important issues to convey to Public Works because when you go to them and you share a project, their goal is to think about what they need to support that project, be it manpower, resources, taking care of a park. If it's not going to be there anymore, I think we should tell them. So tonight I'm hoping to find out when we were aware that DES had issues and the park needed to come out of the plans and the plans needed to be reworked. And also, after this meeting on the 31st, Eversource and DES were going to get together within a couple of weeks and discuss the screening issue. And I'm wondering if tonight there's any kind of update on that. So I think that would be good. And I don't know what, do I have time? I have a little bit of time left.
43 seconds.
Yep.
Okay, so so regarding, and the other thing you have going on here is fees for outdoor dining. I don't know how many of you looked at outdoor dining this year, how actively utilized it was. We had a group that went and collected data for May and June. I would say May was a complete bust. June, it picked up a little more. We're in the end of it. I don't remember the close date. Is it after Columbus Day? I'm thinking it's after Columbus Day, so we probably got another 3.5 weeks and it closes, is what I'm thinking. But, you know, we're into fall for sure, and shorter days, and, but I feel as though those outdoor barriers.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other members of the public like to make a statement to the committee? No? All right, so discussion. So I would ask that for the Riverfront TIF update, if I could have Director Sullivan please join us up front here.
Director Cummings.
Oh, what did I say?
Sullivan.
I'm so sorry. Director Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and if I could get John Vancourt to join me?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, for the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development, and we have with us John Vancourt. He is the project manager overseeing the Riverfront project for us. As you may or may not know, he is the former city engineer here in Nashua, and now he is a principal at Hayner Swanson. So with that being said, I hand it off to Mr. Vancourt.
Thank you, Tim. So to start this,
Just your name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then just so it gets transcribed correctly.
okay, John Vancourt, representing Hayner Swanson, 3 Congress Street, Nashua.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start this project update by talking about several aspects of the schedule. I'd like to talk about permitting. I'd like to talk about developments with our consultant team and the the early priorities on our construction schedule. So in terms of permitting, we're very happy that a few months ago we submitted the permit application to DES and to the Corps of Engineers. And immediately we requested that representatives of DES and Corps of Engineers come, and we wanted to host a tour of the project facility for 2 reasons. One was to demonstrate, to remind them, to let them see that we're advocates for the environment, that we're responsible stewards of the environment, and that this project is not a project that damages the environment. It's a project that complements the environment and provides a basis for the people to enjoy the river in a passive and sustainable way. And the other reason we wanted DES and Corps of Engineers to come in was we wanted to get their initial reaction to the project. And so we developed a design, as a team, we developed a design thinking that we had a very robust project from an environmental perspective, and one of the elements that we had was that there were portions of the project where we were proposing to reconstruct, to improve, to armor the riverbank. And we went into the meeting thinking that was a very strong thing to be doing and to be asking for a permit for. So we're very glad we had the meeting, because DES and Corps of Engineers both didn't have the reaction we expected. They thought that the proposed reconstruction, improvement of the riverbank was a greater impact than warranted by the project. They expressed concern about that. And so, having heard that early in the process, they had just received the application, we took a step back and looked to see what we could do to try to mitigate their concerns in advance so it didn't lead to delay. And so most of the riverbank work is along Parc de la Renaissance. About 500 feet of the riverbank as part of the park, we were proposing to completely reconstruct. The park itself was going to raise the grade in the area about 2 feet. And we took a step back and thought that it might be possible not to raise the grade. It might be possible to significantly reduce or eliminate those riverbank impacts. And so we approached DES and we asked them to, in the purposes of the permit application, to take the park design as submitted out of their review and to hold off until we had a chance to update the design, to reevaluate the design, and see if we could come up with a design that still met all of our functional goals, but was more in line with what they wanted to see from an environmental perspective. So I apologize from the comments earlier. It sounds like I wasn't clear in my earlier presentation at another meeting, but the intent is not to remove the park from the project overall, not at all. The intent is to take some time to reevaluate the park to see if we can make it something that DES can support greater. And so they agreed to that, understanding our motivation, and at this point, we expect to receive all of the permits for the project before the end of the year. And so the permitting process is on track. We are undertaking that reevaluation of that one aspect, Parkville Renaissance. We expect in the next few months to go back to DES and say, now could you please, with this updated design, review this as well. So that's the permitting aspects. As far as our overall consultant team, just a word, so I'm with Hayner Swanson. Our role in this project, we're the project surveyor, and we're also providing project management support services to Tim Cummings and the city team. We're not part of the design team. The design team had been led by VHB, Vanessa Hangen-Bruslin, and VHB approached the city a few months ago and said, now, we all hear every day, we're hearing about in virtually every sector of the economy problems with workforce. The consulting industry is not immune to problems with workforce. VHB came and honestly said they were having workforce concerns that made them concerned that they may not be able to fulfill their role on the project. And the city talked with VHB and the other members of the team, and the decision was made that they would back off from their overall management, that other members of the team, which are H.L. Turner and Halverson, Ty, and Bond, both doing various design parts of the project, they would contract directly with the city, and the city will overall manage the coordination between the different pieces. We did ask VHB to continue to manage the permitting effort, which was well underway, and they did, and they were an instrumental part in getting the permits applications in on time. We asked VHB to continue their structural design elements. They've been doing the structural design of improvements at the Cotton Transfer Bridge. There's an important pedestrian ramp that's being designed over there, as well as a new pedestrian bridge on the east side of Main Street that's part of the project, and they agreed to do that. They're also doing some more minor but important traffic-related issues. The other consultants, H.L. Turner, their work ahead, they've been involved in a lot of river modeling to date. They've been involved in permitting, but their key part for the future is finalizing the design of the boardwalk elements of the project. And the boardwalks are pretty important. So I think we're all familiar with the boardwalks at Peddler's Daughter. And so this project includes boardwalks, basically, if you think of it, the other three corners of Main Street. And so the building where the barbecue restaurant used to be, the building for Water Street, between Water Street and Bicentennial Park, and the building across Main Street, I think it's 58 Main Street. They're designing boardwalks that will run adjacent to those buildings, much like the boardwalk at Peddler's Daughter. H.L. Turner designed the one at Peddler's Daughter, so we're pretty excited about the design that's going forward. And the other major consultant on the team, Halverson, has been doing landscape architecture and has agreed to pick up several of the civil engineering design aspects that VHB did. So the concern came up. We think it's been addressed. We think it's managed in a way that we can proceed with relatively little impact moving forward. And so we're really just bringing you aware of that. As far as the construction schedule goes, our eye on construction schedule has been we want to hit the ground running as soon as the permits are available at the end of the year. We're bringing Harvey Construction on board as the construction manager. In looking at what's ahead, we've been identifying those boardwalks I just talked about as one of the key elements, probably the critical path in construction. I talked about workforce issues. The other thing we hear about throughout the economy is supply problems, and especially problems with the lead time on construction materials. We're concerned about the lead time for the components on the boardwalk, and so we've asked H.L. Turner to accelerate their design of those boardwalk elements. At this point, they're at the 90% level with the boardwalk by the building that had the barbecue restaurant. This week, they'll hit 90% at 4 Water Street, and they'll move to other boardwalks on the project. So what we want to do is, as soon as the permits are in hand, we want to be able to hand Harvey the plans for those boardwalks so that they can line up the contractors and they can get about the effort to order the building components, the structural components, and and get right into whatever that lead time is going to be for us. So we're looking at that as an important early priority. We're also looking at the area between the clock tower building and the river. That's an early priority for construction. The area is due for work. The walkway itself needs to be redone. We really want to get that done as soon as possible. It'll address some maintenance concerns that are there now, and it'll also bring an immediate benefit to people who walk the loop of the project every day. And the last one I want to highlight on the construction schedule is that ADA ramp at the Cotton Transfer Bridge. This is something that we've wanted to get underway for some time. What this does is it allows for ADA access to the Cotton Transfer Bridge on the north side of the river. Right now, access is through an elevator in the building there, but access is only available during certain hours. Once we can get this ramp constructed, the access on both sides of the river will be there at all times. So good news there. We were hoping to be underway, but there's good news associated with the delay, or it seemed like it. The city was successful in securing a $300,000 grant for use in the costs associated with that. Unfortunately, recently the city has learned that the process involved in using that grant funding involves a number of steps. It involves a calendar duration that makes it really take longer than we really want to spend. We want to get that ramp done. So at this point, the expectation is we're going to proceed as an early action item to get that ramp done, but we have approached officials at New Hampshire DOT, very preliminary discussion, to see if that grant funding could be repurposed for something else on the project. And a good example would be the new pedestrian bridge on the other side of Main Street. And so we're going to pursue, if there's any way, to repurpose that money in a way that fits better in with our schedule, for the schedule it takes to access the funds. So beyond those comments, I guess I'd like to just go through some of the project elements. And so we have on the screen, on the slide, you can see the clock tower building. I just mentioned that we want to get that piece, the walkway behind clock tower, we want to get that addressed as an early priority. And then as we move counterclockwise, we come to the area of Parc de la Renaissance. And as I said, we're presently looking at that area. So that's an area originally in the conceptual design we had hoped to expand out into the river. We were going to cantilever out. It was going to give us a lot more room to work. Because of our river modeling, because of our work before we submitted our permit application, we realized we're not going to be able to extend out over the river. So with the area that we have now, and with the intention to minimize or remove the impact to the riverbank, we're looking now to make sure that we can get the primary functional benefits, which are, we want to have a pleasant walk through that as part of the whole program, and we want to have an outdoor performing arts venue as part of that park. And so,
Alderman Dowd?
Can I ask Director Cummings to go full screen?
Sure.
And so as we look at Parc de la Renaissance, one of the other things we've, and this plan shows, we have a floating dock adjacent to the park. We're looking hard at that floating dock because with the reduction in the overall area we have to meet the permitting requirements and the need to make sure that we really have a performing arts venue that has the space it needs to be effective and the walking path, we're just wanting to make sure that the floating dock, that's the best place for it. The grade is pretty high to get down to it. We're concerned about making sure there's a place where someone, if they wanted to kayak or canoe, has a place to park and drop off their kayak. We're taking a hard look at that location for the floating dock as part of this reevaluation. Moving clockwise, we come to 4 Water Street, which is one of the boardwalks I mentioned on the river side of the building. That ties directly into Bicentennial Park. Halverson has designed an update of Bicentennial Park, and as soon as the boardwalk is complete, they'll finish their design of Bicentennial Park with the boardwalk tie-in. We go across Main Street and we come to the building that had I think it's 53 Main Street, that had the barbecue restaurant. We have a new boardwalk along the river at that location. That ties into a small area where we're just reconstructing the path that's there. And then we have another boardwalk that goes out over the water. It's going adjacent to the area where the substation, the Eversource substation is. And we've got a design for screening that substation to break up the visual impact. The problem we're dealing with there, that screening needs to be at least 10 feet from the fence of the substation for Eversource's own safety and maintenance rules. That puts us onto the riverbank with the screening, and we're working on developing the final design of the foundation for that screening. There's a lot going on in a very narrow band there. And so what we're needing to do is, it's sort of like threading a needle between the concerns of Eversource and the concerns of DES and Corps of Engineers with the impact to the bank. We had a meeting this week on this, and the action item from that is we're going to be having a meeting with Eversource engineers, design team engineers, basically a technical meeting, and that hasn't been scheduled yet, but that's the next step to see if there's concurrence that with all of the Eversource rules, and they're important, and the DES rules, which are also important, if we're going to be able to get that screening in place there. It's very tight. Coming away from that area, the walk between the Greeley House and the river is going to be reconstructed. It's going to be a little wider. It'll have a railing on it to protect bicyclists, and then we'll be tying into that ADA ramp to the Cotton Transfer Bridge that I said was one of our early priorities. And so our priority overall is the west side of Main Street, but we are continuing to work on the east side. We're developing the design, so on the side where Margaritas and BAE is along that parking lot, we're working on the design of a path that has a 10-foot buffer. We're trying to get as much bang as we can for a 10-foot buffer in terms of a visual break from the parking lot. We have a new pedestrian bridge, as I mentioned, which is being designed across the river, and that ties into the walkway, which will be reconstructed between Temple Street all the way up to the area behind the library. Behind the library, we'll have a formalized path, and that will tie into a new boardwalk along that building leading up to Main Street. And so that's an overview of where we are with the project development and some of the key elements. And I think at this point, Tim and I would try to answer any questions you may have.
What's the overall cost for the project projected?
We haven't costed it recently. That's actually something we will be doing in the coming months with Harvey. But we have a bond authorized, and we have committed to working within the existing constraints of the bond authorization. And that's why we've always said from the beginning we would be prioritizing the east side of the river. And then whatever is available, we will transition to the west side. I also would take this opportunity to remind folks that this is within the TIF district. So as new development occurs, there may be more revenue available. And if so desired, you could look to take on more projects within the TIF district, and that's obviously future conversations to be had. But when we developed this, we developed it in mind to make sure we worked within the budget that was allotted.
My main question on that subject was, do you see anything with the materials and cost of inflation really impacting things that we want to get done but might not make it? Sounds like obviously we're focusing on the east side, but has anything come to light that says we're really not sure if we can do this particular thing
On the east side?
throughout the project, besides the DES restrictions?
So, do I have it in this? No, it's not in this. So I have another PowerPoint that I could bring up that shows in red what would be essentially put off, and that's the west side, if you will, except for the proposed pedestrian bridge. If there was available monies within the bond authorization,
I think you have your directions mixed up.
On the east side, sorry, on the east side, we would do the pedestrian bridge.
Do you mind sending that to the committee?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. Anyone have questions? I'm sorry. Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, I think that the wooden walkway by Peddler's Daughters lived pretty well with wear and tear. I know you get the right people on the design of the boardwalks, but I just want to make sure they use material that's going to have as long a lifespan as possible, because I could see maintenance being an issue if it isn't. So I would rather spend a little more money on material now rather than spending a lot more money later.
Alderman Clee.
Thank you. On the pedestrian walkway and so on over by where the previous barbecue place was, and going, yes, and all going through there, I know there are railroad tracks very close to that entire area. How close is that? Will we be building any kind of like wall that separates the pedestrian bike from it, or is it just going to be, we'll put the path in and it'll be what it'll be? We don't have a lot of trains going through that area, but we have enough that I was just curious as to whether or not there'd be any kind of delineation between those.
If I could, one of the real benefits of the project is right where you're pointing. Right now, if you want to walk along and tie in, you walk in through the railroad right away.
Right.
So we're going to construct an alternative to that. We're going to have a boardwalk on the riverside of the building, and it won't be necessary now to walk adjacent to the tracks. So we're pulling people away from the tracks.
May I, Mr. Chairman? I truly appreciate that. That is my ward, and I know even going to Bonhoeffer's or something like that, sometimes trying to turn around in that parking lot, you're getting really close to those railroad tracks. And I have walked from the barbecue place over to where the Greeley House is or the ramp is, and yes, it is very dangerous, and I see people doing it all the time. So I appreciate that if we can get to this area. So thank you.
Alderman O'Brien.
Yeah, thank you. From what I recall at the infrastructure meeting, the pedestrian bridge in question is a cantilever bridge that is built off an existing bridge. And that seems to have met its life expectancy. I'm not saying this catastrophic collapse is imminent, but any type of longevity, it isn't there, so therefore we need to do it. Then if we need to do it, we'd do it on somebody else's property, which is that bridge is still owned by a private entity, not the city of Nashua. That's owned by the railroad. So this will clean hands the mix into replacing it with our own particular structure. Am I correct?
Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank you for clearing up the Park de la Renaissance, because that's something that I didn't want to see removed or moved or taken off of the plan or anything like that. And so thank you for clearing that up for us. Thank you.
Prejudice. We should put a shamrock on there too.
We need an Irish park.
Any other questions? None? Anything else to add?
So I'll just close by saying that, as following the trajectory we're on, there's some final design contracts that have come before this body and will continue over the next few months as we're working to try to get the design completed, as well as a Harvey contract for the construction, which we're hoping to start in the spring. So that's the next few steps that you should expect from us.
Great, and I'm sure we can always invite you back to give continuous updates. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean.
So now, Director Cummings, you can stick around. And now, Director Sullivan, you can come on up. So we're going to talk about the process on fees for outdoor dining. Who wants to start?
Sure, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So I handed you communication this evening that I just drafted literally 20 minutes before the meeting, so you may want to, I don't know if you accepted it as a late place on file, but something that you should be aware of is this memo.
Mr. Chairman, probably duly noted, Mr. Cummings may make a motion
You absolutely
to
can.
accept communication that was late and not on the agenda, and so that we'll be able to properly discuss it.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. We'll accept and place this on file.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, there's a memo before you this evening, communication relative to the process for imposing fees for outdoor dining. With me this evening, I want to take a moment and recognize Director Sullivan for joining us. Thank you, Director Sullivan. And if I may, Mr. Chair, I'll just go into the body of the memo.
Yes.
So as you may know, 02208 did not contain any fees for extended outdoor dining. Specifically, 02208 states to defer fees for 1 year and to amend the ordinance to reflect years 2 and 3 will be tentatively approved pending the development of a fee agreement for land use by the restaurants, which require final approval by the Board of Aldermen. The following is the beginning of an outline for a process to develop a fee agreement. So timeline, I'm suggesting tonight is the kickoff discussion of the developing of this fee agreement. I suggest that we continue the public discussion on developing a fee agreement at the October 18th meeting of PEDC. That's your next scheduled meeting. You may want to consider adding a meeting. One is not scheduled right now, but if you were, it would be in early October. But ultimately, at the 18th meeting, I would suggest you develop some consensus by this body. And using that consensus, we would anticipate filing an ordinance on October 25th to the full Board of Aldermen, which would follow its standard process, which ultimately I would recommend and hope that you'd have something finalized before the end of the year. So relative to community engagement, I would suggest that public input be collected here at PEDC over the coming months. PEDC may want to consider asking the Chamber of Commerce, Great American Downtown, and Downtown Improvement Committee for their sentiments. The Office of Economic Development will engage downtown merchants and restaurants to solicit their feedback and report back to this body. From there, I then pivoted the communication to talk about the background and to give some context to what we've learned thus far. And so just to help give orientation to everyone, the planning department reached out to various communities to get an understanding as to what it is that they assess. And what is outlined here is in Manchester, $420 is assessed per parking space with a limit of 3 spaces in front of the businesses. And there is an opportunity for businesses to apply for some special grant funding to help alleviate the costs. In Lowell, Massachusetts, there's no fees assessed at all for any of the uses of the parking spaces, but they do need to make sure that they have the proper insurance in place. And then in Concord, they assess $1,000 per space, and they provide discounts of 30% if not used by June 1st, and if only starting to be used on October 15th, there's a 50% discount. August 15th, thank you. And then lastly, just for some context, the loss of revenue that these parking spaces that we currently have used for extended outdoor dining hovers in the range of $30,000 to $45,000 per year. And so that translates into an approximate parking space of about $890, which is just using $40,000 as the number, splitting the difference between 30 and 45,000. So again, this is my recommended strategy in terms of helping the dialogue and conversation over the next few weeks. This is in draft form and obviously subject to change, but wanted to give you a jumping off point so you could have the conversation.
Great. Alderman Clemens.
Thank you. So not to put you on the spot, but do you remember approximately what the cost was to put the barriers out and then take them in?
Off the top of my head, I'm
Just
gonna
a
say,
ballpark.
yeah, $45,000 ballpark, call it $50,000 to put them out and take them in.
That's for both, so 25,000 at the beginning of the year, 25,000 at the end,
Approximately.
approximately.
That's right.
Okay.
So I was gonna ask the exact same question, because on top of the fees for the loss of fee revenue from the parking spots, what's the labor cost associated? We're putting that stuff out and taking it back, because that works into a cost. Alderman O'Brien.
Yeah, thank you. Director Cummings, thank you for preparing this. I think this really puts the dartboard on the wall, okay, so that we can hit the bullseye with it. But there's a couple of things I'm not really married to 100%, because it does say public input, although I really like to have public input. But what public input? Is this going to be another opportunity for people who, the boo bears that didn't want the barriers at all? And are we going to muddy into the swamp of that discussion again? I think that was well vetted, well voted on, and handled appropriately by the Committee of Infrastructure. I don't see the need to do that. I hope that this conversation will be progressive in so much as to go into looking whether we want to charge or not. And keep in mind, there's no law that says we have to charge at all. But to go back in a little bit of the Wayback Machine of the history when the barriers were being discussed by infrastructure, some people did come up and say, you know, are we giving it to them or anything else? Time was time was of the essence. There wasn't enough time to come up and perfectly work out a fee structure program for this year's dining program. But now, with time on our side, granted, Director Cummings has put a time date on it, as well as he should. That way we can get something done under the wire. But it wasn't our intention in the Committee of Infrastructure to come up with fees. That's PEDC's concern. We're in charge of the barriers. PEDC will come up if they decide to go with it. And then it's, to get back to the public comment, you didn't specifically mention it, Director Cummings, but to me, it is the people who are going to be paying the potential fees. And that is going to be the restaurateurs themselves. Those are the stakeholders, I think, that we really need to be listened to. Now, I see something here in Lowell that they discuss that they're liable for liability insurance. Maybe that's something that needs to come across legal's desk for advice, if I could make the recommendation to the chair on that particular. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not. But if it is the case of liability insurance, that would distract by what would be, you know, topped on with a fee. It may not be prudent for some of these restaurants to have outdoor dining. So to be on the side of cautious of how much do you really want to really charge and to meet all the other type of criteria with it. Because it seems like, despite some negative quarters on the subject, it seems to have been, from people that I've talked to, on both sides, negative and positive, but I think we found out in the Committee of Infrastructure, it was a very positive, successful type of program. Granted, you could go down at any time, you know, day, and maybe the restaurant isn't 100% or the outdoor dining isn't 100% occupied. It is not on a rainy day. Sometimes it has to do with the sunlight. One side of the street on Main Street gets very baked, and people may base their restaurant decisions upon that. So it's unfair to say drive by and not see complete. But I think if you have the stakeholders come in, they will be able to tell you what is the value to assist this board on what type of money we're talking in all fairness. Thank you.
Got Alderman Clee and then Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you very much. Director Clemens, you may, I'm sorry, Director Cummings. Oh, gosh, we're getting everybody's names wrong here. You may not be able to answer this, but I saw the loss of revenue that was mentioned. But I'm also curious as to if this loss of revenue that you mentioned here is over all of the entire downtown area or just the area with the barriers? And my follow-up question would be that, are there if it's just the Barry area, was there any increase or loss in any other area? In other words, that people went and parked somewhere else because they weren't parking there, so did we increase another area that we hadn't been in?
If I may, Mr.
Of course, yeah.
That's a great question that we have not studied yet, because you're talking about displacement. I don't know if the revenues have increased because we didn't quote unquote lose it, but we just collected it somewhere else. So that's something that should be studied. But to answer your question about where that loss of revenue came from, that is from where the barriers were specifically dropped and placed. That includes Main Street and the side streets.
May I follow up?
Of course.
Thank you. If we could get some of that information, if there was anything displaced, because I know personally where I would have normally parked on Main Street, I parked in, the High Street parking lot. I parked in the taxi lot or something of that nature. And I know others have done the same thing. So I'd just be curious to see if we had any displaced other areas, or if the entire downtown was at a loss, meaning that people just didn't come downtown because of the heat or anything, because we had a very hot summer this year. So thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Clemens?
Thank you. Just to follow up on that quickly, I mean, part of what you're gonna see is definite loss in revenue, even if people went and parked somewhere else. And the reason for that is because of the way the fee structures are. Most of the barriers are on Main Street, which is $1.50 an hour. So if you're going to park somewhere else, it's cheaper. So there's a definite loss there, regardless of whether or not we made up a little bit, maybe somewhere else, which I'm sure that if you looked at it, that's what you'd see, but it is still a loss. The point, to my point, I think, moving forward, I think what we need to look at is the map that exists now and what restaurants are tied to what areas in that particular map right now. And I believe that that should be what we offer them next year, regardless of what the price is. And they're either gonna pay it or they're not, or they'll shrink it down a little bit if they say, well, I'll take half that, for example, if Martha's decides they don't want that whole block, they say, well, you know what, if the fee is this amount, so maybe I can give back a couple of spaces or something like that, and we should try to work with them. But I would suggest taking the map that we have now and not altering that. That way that takes that part of the discussion out of it, and then that way we just literally work on what is going to be the fees. Mm-hmm. That being said, I think would be not, so we have a loss of revenue it's kind of like a double loss, right? We have a loss in revenue in the parking fees, and there's the cost associated with putting the barriers out. I don't believe, and I could be wrong, and we should try to find this out, but I don't believe it would be possible to recoup both, because to do so would mean that we would charge essentially $2,000 a space, if my math adds up correctly.
Director Cummings, did you have a?
Well,
Approximately 1,000.
It'd be 1,000 just to make up the loss of parking revenue. Be another 1,000 on top of that.
Yes.
To recoup the cost of bringing out the barriers and putting them back.
I see
So,
what you're saying, yeah. Yep.
so I don't know what the appetite would be for restaurants, but I think we should do a survey of them. And again, using the existing map, going out and finding those restaurants and saying, what's the likelihood of you staying if it's 2,000? What is it the likelihood of you staying if it's 1,000?
That's reasonable too, and one, we're a city government, we shouldn't be looking to make a profit, and maybe not even break even.
Well, if I could continue.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. I think it's not, I don't think it is a bad thing to go out and survey and find out if we could break even. Because just thinking about the number of tables that are in some of these spaces, or even in the smallest space, if the average check is $100, then, you know, it could pay for itself over one weekend.
Right.
The question is that in the minds of the owner worthwhile at what price? So I think it's worthwhile to go out and ask those questions of them. But I think from the committees, or at least from my standpoint, I would at least like to make up one of those costs. So at a minimum, I would like to make up the parking revenue, or I would like to make up the cost associated with putting the barriers out. If it was my preference, I would take the money that we collect from these fees and put them directly back into the parking revenue, which would then go, of course, to the Downtown Improvement Committee. But that would be my preference. And just, you know, expense the fact that this is a program that costs money, and it is what it is. But
Thank you, Alderman Clemmons. And before Alderman Dunn, and Director Cummings, if we're going to be reaching out to all those restaurants, can we also collect information from them on top of what they actually earn for those tables? Let's say they turn a pretty good profit. Hopefully, they're keeping track. I would, in something like that. Getting, I don't know, basically free square footage to actually say, hey, yeah, we did turn a profit, and this is a great benefit to us, or not. So, Alderman Dowd?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, as I brought up the last time we talked about fees, I would not want to have a fee that was no problem to Martha's or Surf, or maybe a couple other restaurants, but then the small restaurants get killed and they can't do it. I think we have to find a happy medium there. The other thing is, when you expand the amount of meals you can serve, I assume, but I'll ask for guidance, do we get any money from meals that are sold, or general business profits on these restaurants that increase their ability to sell meals by 25 to 50% by having outdoor dining? Because we'll get that revenue as well, and that may be more significant than we know at the moment.
Okay. Alderman Tebow, then Alderman O'Brien, then Alderman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a couple of good points were made. You know, Alderman O'Brien had said, why would we go out and just get public information? We're not looking to have the barriers or not have the barriers. That's not the question that's out there. We already have an ordinance for that. We're looking for fees, and that really, I mean, I think most people probably think that they should pay something. So I'm not sure that that would help, but I think going to the restaurants like you guys have mentioned would be the proper route to do that, to see if it was worth having. You know, the other piece about the revenue, it would be interesting to see too. I mean, the reason why we do this, or one of the reasons why we do this, is to try to attract people to downtown, right? To go downtown more. So even if they're not using the parking spaces that are in front of the restaurants anymore, one, we didn't get rid of all those spaces like we did in years past. So there's still some of those spaces out there that they can pay. Also, if we're having more people go downtown, especially in the last couple of years, because the last couple of years we were set up for COVID. This year we're not. We're setting them up for trying to increase the amount of people that go down there. Are we seeing revenue in, yes, they're displacing, they're not parking for the 150, they're going to a cheaper place, but are we getting more people going to those spaces because we're getting more people downtown? So I'd be curious. I think there's more revenue there than we're actually saying, or we're actually thinking here. And I would hate to see this number that people see, 45,000, and then all of a sudden it's out there in the world. Oh my God, Nashville's spending 45,000 plus the 50,000 for barriers. It's crazy, they don't work. Because they did work this year. We did not see traffic backlogs. We did not see, you know, the things that were causing traffic backlogs, the peddler's daughter, for instance. We cleared that up, and it's gone. I've gone down Main Street many times during rush hours. It's smooth, smooth. And parking, I drive around the side streets. There's plenty of parking. I haven't had problems finding parking. Yes, there's a few nights when I go by and you know, Tuesday night's not rocking, but I've been there other nights, Thursday, Friday, people play music outside of San Francisco Kitchen, people are having fun. If we have enough revenue coming in to make up some of it or most of it, again, I think that's worth charging a certain fee. But I think, you know, last year I said, hey, let's amend this bill to put $1,000 per parking space. And everybody looked at me and went like this, and I said, I withdraw that, and now we're talking 2,000. So, or that's a choice, right? If you give them a survey, would you pay 200, 800, 600, 1,000, 2,000, whatever, they're not gonna pick 2,000. So we'd have to do a survey in a way that makes them pay, you know, put down what they would actually pay, because everyone's always gonna pick the lower price, you know? So I think that we have to think about that too when we go out there. But I just think there's more revenue coming in than we know. And I think we have to continue to find ways to drive people downtown so we do get that revenue. And I think this year was somewhat of a success. I'm agreeing with charging fees for it. I just think we gotta make it, like to Alderman Dowd's point, reasonable. Maybe you know, Buckley's, or not Buckley's, but Michael Timothy's goes down a space, you know, and just has 2 spaces or just has 1 space. But I think we have to charge something. We just don't know what it is yet.
Alderman O'Brien.
Yeah, thank you. Just to echo what Alderman Dowd, I'm very surprised Alderman Clee or Representative Clee didn't jump on it too. But you are correct, Alderman Dowd, in so much that if a CO, which is a certificate of occupancy for a particular restaurant, is, let's say, 100 people for an easy number, and then the outdoor dining boosts them up to 150, the meals tax that gets on does eventually, if we can get the spiny little fingers of the state off of it completely, but it does come back to the city of Nashua. You know, we don't have a parade down Main Street over it, but the money does come back to the individual community. So we do get some, you know, another hidden profit that does come in from that. So just want to state it for the record. Am I correct,
Yes,
Representative Khalid?
for a very short period of time.
Yeah, and being up at the State House too, I recall that most of our meals tax that we collect actually subsidizes smaller rural communities than actually come back to the cities. Alderman Clee.
Yes, you're correct. A lot of it does go to some of the smaller areas, but we do get it back. Rooms and meals tax, we do get some of it back. And just as a side note, the state had been, as I think was being alluded here, the state had been keeping their little fingers on it, but they finally started releasing the monies after much loud noises. I want to make a comment relative to the Manchester fees. I had spoken to Alderman there last year when we were talking about fees, and I think I had even commented that they were doing fees, and they saw a reduction in small restaurants, as I think it had been kind of mentioned, that could not afford it. The larger restaurants could afford it, and recently I drove down Manchester and I did see some of the larger restaurants had kind of expanded. And their parking spaces are a little different than ours. They have head-in parking. They don't have the parallel parking as we do. So it's kind of a little bit different. But they did see many of the smaller restaurants unable to afford it because they didn't get, even though they did see an increase, it wasn't enough to offset the cost. So while I do agree we should be charging something, I'm not sure that we can necessarily recoup all of our cost. Recouping some of the cost is better than nothing. But I think we do need to keep in mind that we do have some smaller restaurants that are, you know, like the tapas and so on, that we don't want to hurt them in the long run of it. So I don't want to pick and choose by saying we're going to charge this fee and therefore we push some of them out of the market. I don't want to hurt those restaurants.
Alderman Clemens. Oh, Director Sullivan, did you have I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree. I don't want anyone to think that I mentioned $2,000 because it's the amount that we take to cover our costs. But I don't think that, and I don't think this about anything, we're not in the business of making money in this city. We don't do services to make money. We do them at best to break even if we can. But even then, what we offer, we often lose on it. And that's okay, because that is our job, is to balance and to figure out what our priorities are and what's important as a community to us. And I think this is a huge economic development tool that helps small businesses in our downtown, and it, you know, attracts people to the city. But the other thing that I wanted to just follow up on was the fact that during the process last year, it was made clear that to the restaurants to figure out these numbers, figure out what your revenue is from the spaces that you're getting, because there will be fees. And that's what, you know, was told to them, and that's what I hope that they have, you know, their books showing is what, you know, was outside, or at least they have an idea of what they can afford to pay. Because essentially, you know, I think it's important that these restaurants, if they want to do this, do pay back into the program, because it is a benefit that they're getting, and they, you know, obviously it helps the entire community, but they are the primary benefactors, and I do believe that that it's okay to ask them for a fee. So it'll be interesting to see what comes back. I would be open to any number of things, and I guess where I want the data to come from, though, and I agree with Alderman O'Brien and I agree with Alderman Tebow, is that I want this data to come from the restaurants. I want it to come from the business community, because as far as I'm concerned, the question of the barriers and whether they're there or not has already been answered, and we are simply talking about fees.
Just once, I would agree with Alderman Clemmons. You know, this is obviously a great public-private partnership. So we have to also give something back. Given the barriers, you look at the offset of cost. Are we going to pay the 50 grand for the barriers and we eat that and then collect meals tax from it? And then we even out on that backside. It doesn't have to be both combined. I personally want to see an application that they bring in their P&L, or if they're a smaller business, that their Schedule C, to show us how much they make. I own my own business. I had to produce all that for PPP loans, EIDL loans. We're the government too. We can ask for those things. And like Alderman Clemmons said, they should be prepared knowing that fees are coming. All right, who is next? Alderman Karen.
Yes, thank you. I've been listening to everything, and I think I agree with Alderman O'Brien. It should be centered, the information that we want should be coming from the restaurants, the chamber, downtown, what have you. But I think that you need to put together a questionnaire, even if it's 10 questions. Do you like this? Do you want this? How much money did you make? Did you fill up your tables? Because I have to say, I go downtown a lot, and Martha's is always full. Some of these other smaller areas are not. Maybe at night they are, but it's not as active to me as some of the other restaurants like Martha's and Surf or those things. So I think it's important that we get feedback from them, whether they think they would be better off instead of having 10 tables, 5 would be better. Yes, you want an answer, would you pay a fee? And I think it's important. They are benefiting from this. We are too, because you want to bring people downtown, but these organizations, these restaurants are the ones that are benefiting from having the outdoor dining. And I agree, whatever we run within the city, we never make money, it's to cover costs. So, but I think that's important. But I had a question. Who's liable? if they're not carrying it, liability insurance, who's liable if something happens?
Director Cummings?
We require everyone to name the city as additionally insured.
Okay, so we're added as part of their normal insurance, okay. Thank you. But I think it's important that if you're going to put together a questionnaire, I think you're better off having 10 questions and everybody gets the same thing so that they're all answering the questions. And, you know, Director Sullivan and you, Director Cummings, could certainly work on that. And whatever the committee has asked for as input, I think is important for us to make a decision down the road.
And if,
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. And if you could send maybe all the contact emails that you have for the businesses, I don't mind, as the chairman, going down and talking to everybody too, just so it's clear and transparent that this is coming down and we can get feedback and invite them here to talk. Alderman O'Brien.
Alderman O'Brien I was going to rise and make a motion, but I will yield temporarily to my esteemed colleague from Ward 2. And then if the chair can recognize me for my own motion, thank you. All right, I'll yield to you.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, I just want to point out that I've heard several times that people go down the street during the day and they don't see a lot of people outside. Well, first of all, many of the restaurants are closed on Mondays. And so there's not going to be anybody outside. And having come down here several days to try and get something for lunch, there aren't a lot of restaurants open for lunch downtown anymore. There's a handful. And that's why you'll see people outside there for lunch, but the others aren't because they're not open. So I think that has to be taken into account. They are open at night, so you get out at night and they're all packed, especially Friday, Saturday nights. You know, many nights where you used to walk in a surf, couldn't get a seat, now you can get one outside. But even then, there are nights that there still aren't any outside.
Friday night, hour and 15 minutes at Surf, waiting. Go ahead,
I'll
Alderman.
yield to.
Thank you.
I just want to make more of a quick statement than anything. The one thing we should keep in mind when this survey is being done is that the Performing Arts Center will be open and hopefully very successful, which will have an impact on those restaurants as well. And I think they need to be reminded about that when this survey is put up there, if they feel that this would happen. Definitely the Surf, Martha's, Bellissimo, those that, you know, Michael Timothy's right there will definitely be impacted by it, I think. But I do think some of the smaller ones would be as well. And I think that's a valid point that we should be reminding these people. It's going to change next summer's downtown activity. So thank you.
Alderman O'Brien, you have a motion?
Thank you. I do have a motion, Mr. Chairman. My motion would be to direct the chair to convene the committee on October 21st as a full board with the intention of, public input, particularly from the stakeholders of existing restaurants. Also to include representative of the Chamber of Commerce, representative of the Great American Downtown, and a representative from the Downtown Improvement Committee, and to work together with the economic developer to secure that particular meeting so that the public can be heard on this particular matter.
October 18th, was that what you meant to say?
October, yes. Did I get the date wrong?
Yes.
I'll amend it to October 18th. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. You all heard the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Well, just, I was just going to say a comment, but I think this is very similar. I think.
Alderman Camo, I see you there. So,
Yeah, I mean, if you, Mr. Chair, if you follow this simply, pretty much like what we did together, and working together on that combined committee when we did the barriers, I don't think we need infrastructure involved with this. This is your baby, but I think that, following the format of having the public, like what we did, have people come in and designate and find out, I think you'll get the wealth of information. Because it was partially discussed when we were discussing the barriers. And I agree with Alderman Clemmons. They should know that we did mention it several times to anticipate this. So hopefully they do have those things to be able to backfill us in with the information and everything on this.
And Director Cummings, you'll reach out to the stakeholders on this committee's behalf?
Sure.
Can you please
And I'll,
include me on the email?
you should, I didn't mention you, but you're in it too.
Any other questions or statements on this particular topic? Director Sullivan, you haven't said a word.
Director Cummings covered everything this evening. I was here just as an observer, but certainly I'll be assisting him with some of the data study. Particularly, we had worked on reviewing several communities in addition to the 3 that were mentioned within Director Cummings' memorandum, but will certainly be an integral part of this process moving forward as well with the committee.
So with that said, I'll come right back to you, Director. That might be a heavy lift on October 18th. We might have to push off. It was announced at the end, we're going to have Director Sullivan come and talk about rezoning. Maybe we can add a second meeting next month because the fire marshal was also going to come to that meeting. So.
I do see Director Cummings did put October 21st to go for a first reading.
25th.
I'm sure Director Cummings probably understands. In the worst case scenario, we could get bogged down again. So I think Director Cummings, I'm not going to put words into his mouth, but having worked with him in the past, find him most cooperative if we need an extension of such. So I do anticipate, Mr. Chair, that this might take more
Some
than
time.
the 1 or 2 meetings. And God bless us all. Thank you.
Director Cummings, you had something you wanted to say.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just there's one element that hasn't been discussed this evening that I want to make sure I get it out there so it's at least in your minds moving forward. I want to just, make sure it's in folks' forefront of their mind that the map was put together in a certain way, yes, taking into consideration the loss of the parking spaces and the usage, but also public safety was involved as well. So the idea of maybe contracting in some areas because there is a lack of payment by a participating member, depending on the area, may cause a public safety issue. So you may see a conversation arise if it goes in that direction where we flag that and say, this user is only saying they're using 3 spaces, but they're technically using 4. But if you pull it back, it will cause a public safety issue. So let's forego that 1 space for the sake of public safety. Those are all conversations that will be had. I really don't want to rehash the map over again, but there is that element to it that I didn't hear discussed tonight that I would want to put on the table. The second element that was touched upon tangentially that I do think is important to keep in the forefront of your mind is not every parking space is equal in value. So we're talking about averages right now and treating everyone equitably, but you may look at something in the future weeks and say, there's clearly a higher premium here, and there's maybe not so much of a premium somewhere else, and that's a policy decision as to whether you want it to balance out in the end. But those points I wanted to make sure I raised them for you to consider this evening and to keep in your mind as you're moving forward.
And one thing, when you're comparing the large and smaller restaurants, they don't have the smaller restaurants don't have as many spaces, so it's going to be comparable to what they can afford within their square footage, their business plan. So it's not going to be Michael Timothy's pays $2,000 because they have 5 spaces, and then what's a small restaurant? The Tapas place pays $400 or something. That's probably end up working out to be less for the smaller restaurants. Alderman Camo, and I saw your hand up, but it came down. Do you have anything to add?
I actually just wanted to speak to Alderman O'Brien's motion, but since the moment passed, I will.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Do you want to make a statement?
No, I'm fine for now, thank you.
All right, my apologies. Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, and so in regards to what Director Cummings said about the safety aspect of it, I think, again, with the map, I agree 100% with what he said, and in the sense that, like, okay, if if there's a restaurant that right now uses 3 spaces, but they only want to use 2 or whatever after the fee structure comes up, but that means, but it's impossible to whatever, to get that space back onto the rolls for what it's worth. That's fine to me, and that's okay, like, but I think that enforcement wise though, I think we have to make sure that the restaurant understands you're only paying for 2 spaces, you're using 2 spaces.
Right.
So, so even though that other space is there and it would be tempting to put a table in there, you're not paying for that. So, you know, and I think we just need to make that portion of it clear. But I also think too, where we do have the opportunity to reduce and bring back a space onto the rolls, I think we should do that also. So, you know, my comments earlier about the map were more of if everybody participates next year, that's doing, you know, where it is now this year, that's awesome. We already have the map created. We don't need to go back to the drawing board. The only time we would need to do that is if there was a particular safety issue that maybe came up this summer where they want to tweak something, or if, again, a restaurant decides they're not going to participate. So that's where I hope we would go with that.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien.
And to thank you, Alderman Clemmons, you bring up, because in the future of infrastructure, and I haven't had the conversation yet, but I'm sure Director Cummings would not be surprised that I would probably say that we need, infrastructure needs to have a conversation with the public safety stakeholders, such as the police and fire and everybody else. Although this is you know, when we put the barriers up, they were intended to be fluid, but not to be changed on a daily basis. Like the seasonal water turns to ice, you know, but if we needed to in an emergency, we could do adaptive changes. And I think, again, we would not be doing our due diligence if infrastructure did not look at this particular issue again, reevaluate it, see if there's a need to tweak it here and there. And I think we came up with something, but nothing is infallible, so therefore looking at that.
Alderman Dowd.
2 quick things. One, it's not just around here where they do outdoor dining. I get to travel a lot. I can tell you in many other states, there's a lot of outdoor dining. And this is a long-term issue. I don't want anybody jumping on it right away. But many places have much more attractive barriers, half the size of our barriers. And we need to look at because that would also help eliminate some of the traffic issues that people tend to bring up, although I didn't see any this year. And it would also increase the looks. I'm not saying we remove our very colorful cement, whatever color that is, barriers, but I think long-term, if we start looking at what you could have downstream, and maybe even waive the fees for a year if the restaurants buy their own barriers. We'd have to get them approved by the city engineer, but anyway, just a thought.
Alderman Clemmons. Anyone else? Any questions, comments? All right. We'll move on to the next item. Thank you so much, directors. Hope I don't mess up your names again. Here we go. Communications.
There is none.
Unfinished business.
There is none.
Petitions.
There is none.
New business.
There is none.
Tabled in committee.
None.
General discussion.
The 3 of us.
You know, I mentioned this last night at the Human Affairs Committee, but yesterday was a great day for Nashville. The Halua has reopened. It's finally open after 3 years. I'm sure, Director Cummings, I know you have your hand in everything. You're probably working hard to get this place back up. I love that restaurant. Best crab ragoon in Mai Tais, I think, in the entire city. So if you want to support a local small business, get up to exit 6. All right. Public comment.
Lori Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. The red line document that you requested a copy of for this board, could I also get a copy of that as well, which looks at what came out of the project? I want to tell you that I'm not really supportive of the Riverfront project anymore at this time, because when we costed that and had the public hearing, you passed a $20 million bond to do a certain amount of work. And now you've got to remove maybe 40% of the work because the cost of everything has gone up. And nobody has addressed the fact that that's not what the taxpayers were sold. I go to buy a house that's 2,000 square feet, and I think I'm gonna pay $400,000, and then all of a sudden, 3 or 4 months later, I go to look at the same house, and for $400,000, I gotta get 1,000 square feet. And I may rethink and say, you know what, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it. I'm not making that investment to spend that money. But the city never thinks that way. And I think it's not appropriate, and I think those red line changes should be out in the public and seen. What are we getting for our money now? And I think that with the bonding rates, I don't know if the bonds have been sold for this project. There's been no bond update, but if they haven't, your interest rates are pushing up a good bit, and that's a question. I'm also very concerned when I heard John speak to the fact that the city will serve as the coordinator between H.L. Turner and the other company, because we don't, our project manager backed out. Who will that person be? Because I have major concerns with the Economic Development Office taking on more projects. It's just not right. They're overworked to begin with, and a staff of 2 people. They have 20, 25 projects to manage now, and the records aren't being maintained properly. So for that reason, I don't support this anymore. That's a different beast now, completely, and it's going to cost the taxpayers a lot more money, not only on the bond for what we get, but from the work we have to do internally. The survey that we hired an intern that I believe worked with the Economic Development Office that was collecting information this summer on the barriers as part of like an internship. Could we get that data? Let's see what that data shows. I really think you do have to come up with a fee schedule. I don't support the idea that we charge nothing. I think when we sold this last year, I think Ben expressed it well. We sort of sold it to the public that we weren't going to give it away for free. And I think we have to commit to that. And I think you have to work with the people. And I think some of these smaller businesses won't go for it because their tables really aren't being used. And remember, we're not saying you get no outdoor dining. They still have outdoor dining, but just less tables. And I think the smaller places will use those. And so that we know there's 5 or 6 bigger places that really use the space. The rest of them, from my standpoint, dinner or lunch, don't. And I go down there every day.
Time.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public wishing to speak? Director Cummings, the red line that I requested, is there a way to post that online so the members of the public can see it?
I believe it already is online with the Budget Review Committee, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So what was being referenced was actually a PowerPoint slide that I used during the bond authorization. And it was during that meeting that slide was developed and presented, and it's readily available, and it hasn't changed. And it was made clear at that meeting that we would work within the budget, and we believed we had enough monies available for prioritizing the west side of the project. And we said at that time that whatever monies were available, we would look to do the east side. And we said we would look to prioritize, in particular, the pedestrian bridge crossing. That was all made, emphatic. I was emphatic about that during the public hearing, and nothing has changed since then.
Thank you for clarifying that. If you can still send it to me, I have no problem sending it to the member of the public. Any comments by the Alderman? Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make it clear that I think everybody here tonight said that they would want the restaurants to pay something. I don't think anybody said it would be nothing or even minimal. So I just wanted to make clear that we've all felt that way. Everybody said it at some point. Doesn't mean the aldermen that aren't here feel differently. I don't want to speak for them, but I thought we made it pretty clear tonight that we would all head that way, despite whatever the survey or any kind of public feedback is.
Thank you. Any other members? Any aldermen want to make a statement? All right. Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make the motion to adjourn the September 20th, 22 meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, we are adjourned at 8:19 PM.